What's up? Welcome back to Nostalgia. Dave here with another podcast. What's going on in pop culture right now? We got a big one this week. Taylor Swift's new album, The Tortured Poets Department. Of course, we had to discuss that. Shogun on FX, masterpiece television show. It's over. We have to talk about it. Also, had to talk about new Guy Ritchie film, The Ministry of Ungentlemanly Warfare. He's cranking them out every year, and I'm a fan. I'm less a fan of Zack Snyder's Rebel Moon Part 2, but we had to talk about it. And also a little K-pop action. We got Yuqi from G-Idol. Her solo project is out. So I think a nice smorgasbord here to discuss. Make sure you subscribe, youtube.com/nostalgiapod, linktree.com/nostalgiapod. See the links below. Get the best of 2024 Spotify playlist, also linked below. And yeah, let's get into it. What's up? Welcome back to Nostalgia. Dave here with a review of Yuqi's debut solo album, Yuqi, stylized with a 1 instead of an I. Of course, Yuqi, people know her as one of the members of the very successful K-pop group G-Idol. I reviewed their last album, 2, just a few months ago. And they're a very notable K-pop group, of course, because they are equal parts signed to a non-Big Four smaller label in Cube Entertainment, while also being one of the more interesting groups across the industry because they're a self-producing group. They actually make their own music. They write their own lyrics. Of course, the leader of the group, Soyeon, very, very talented, right? And I think G-Idol have kind of grown a large fan base because of this. They just don't really have any direct peers. They're kind of unique for what they do. I quite enjoyed their song Wife off the new album again. And Yuqi has stood out as a member of G-Idol, and she's the third member to go solo and release any solo material anyway. She stood out in the past because she's one of the rappers in the group, but also because she just kind of has a husky, kind of raspier voice. It stands out as a vocalist. I actually think she's pretty good as far as K-pop rappers go. I liked her flow a lot on Rolly off the new album from a few months ago. So now we have this debut album, which is not her first solo material. She's released a handful of songs the past few years. 7 songs, 20 minutes. Ultimately, I'd say Yuqi's debut solo album is good. It doesn't knock my socks off, but I think there's a lot of fun stuff here and a lot of stuff that feels in line with what you'd expect from Yuqi as a vocalist and G-Idol in general as a K-pop act, in the sense that we are doing a bit of genre experimentation here. There is some rock-leaning stuff. The heavy drums are pretty consistent on this. Yuqi has dabbled with some pop rock stuff with the past solo work. She doesn't fully commit to it on this album necessarily. Overall, I'd say it's a pretty solid track list front to back. The single Freak, which has a music video out now, nice guitar, really nice groove, honestly, on that with the drums. And then the chorus is pretty fun from Yuqi, even if ultimately the song feels kind of a bit underdeveloped. It's not as ear-catching as it could have been, but it's still pretty fun for what it is. I also like the song My Way, which again has very upbeat drums, but the chant outro in particular stood out to me, even if the chorus is perhaps a little underwritten. I think the best song has to be Red Rover. That catchy synth line immediately grabs you, and just the chorus is really big, really catchy. To me, that's the one right here. I think on Clap, you have Yuqi rapping. We have I think a fun flow from her, but the lyrics, they're a bit cringy. For my taste, honestly. Drink It Up, you have PH1 as a rap feature, and he's pretty fun for I think a pretty small part of the song, where he switches up his flow almost as a sung flow alongside a normal rap flow. It's solid. Every Time with Minnie, her of course G-Idol bandmate, that's the first kind of slower, more understated moment on the track list, but I wouldn't call it a ballad or anything. I think it's still pretty upbeat, pretty catchy, and a strong song overall. Usually when K-pop albums divert into a slower moment, that's usually where I lose interest, but I didn't with this one. And then the last song, Could It Be? Again, another fun, upbeat, groovy beat. The drums really consistent once again. I think in the past with G-Idol music, Yuqi has kind of been more of the chaos agent on some songs, where there's that playfulness, there's that anarchist side to her vocals and the way the songs are made. And I don't know if anything's super groundbreaking or genre pushing on this solo album, but again, a song like Red Rover really stuck with me as an immediately catchy song, and everything else is pretty solid. So I'm not mad at it by any means. Of course, in general, I think most K-pop soloists are stronger when they're part of their original group, and I think that's the case with everything I've heard from the G-Idol members thus far. So looking forward to their group's continued success. And I'm thinking about going to Head in the Clouds in New York, where they'll actually be performing, which is, I believe, one of their first performances in the United States. They've been here before, but it's tempting. I mean, you gotta take those opportunities when they're there. So I'm thinking about it. But yeah, let me know. What did you think of Yuki's debut solo album? How are you feeling about G-Idol in general? Let me know. And for more music reviews, more K-pop reviews, subscribe, and I'll see you next time. What's up? Welcome back to Nostalgia. Dave here with a review of Taylor Swift's 11th album, The Tortured Poets Department. Surprise, surprise, Taylor Swift is back in our lives in 2024, like she never left. Of course, it's been a very busy time in the Taylor Swift business, as I'm sure everybody knows. The Eras Tour on its way to being the highest grossing concert tour of all time. The Eras movie, very successful last year. Of course, the Travis Kelce relationship still going strong. Kansas City Chiefs winning the Super Bowl. Taylor Swift along for that ride. On the more negative side of things, you have Taylor Swift's music being removed from TikTok as a member of Universal Music Group. And yet she has just recently returned to TikTok with music in the lead up to this new album, something that has gotten a polarized reception, because why should Taylor Swift get special treatment from her label? Yes, you understand the business angle of maybe why she can pull that off, but is that right? Is that a good way to treat other artists? That being said, I think Taylor also got some criticism for how she announced the Tortured Poets Department, which was literally on stage while accepting a Grammy win just a few months ago, of course, winning Album of the Year and other awards for her last album, Midnights. So Taylor, at this point has proven that she is so invested in maintaining her pop stardom and so really, I think, able to continue to do it, right? She has never been more popular. She has never been more famous. She's never been more powerful than she is right at this moment. And of course, lest we forget that she's been re-releasing her Taylor's version re-recording albums of her albums that she did not own the full masters to, of course, and that pursuit will continue, we assume, soon enough, with Reputation being the last record to receive such treatment. Nonetheless, you have a new album out here with the Tortured Poets Department, and I think being the follow-up to Midnights is kind of an interesting place as well, because Midnights, despite the Album of the Year win, I think a lot of people see that victory and that historic third Album of the Year win for Taylor at the Grammys 2 months ago. I think people really view that as kind of a award for the massive 2023 that Taylor Swift had. Whereas Midnights, of course, having a monster hit, excellent song, and Antihero, despite all that, it's no one's favorite Taylor Swift album, which is no shot against Taylor. Again, it was her 10th record. They can't all be the best. But, I think it was certainly an uneven album, but there were highs to it for sure. I have to say that Taylor Swift's 11th album, The Tortured Poets Department, is not what I wanted the follow-up to Midnights to be. The songwriting does not match the music on this album. I think there's some genuine, interesting, funny, personable songwriting on this album, and of course some deeply referential stuff to Taylor Swift's life. The line about Charlie Puth should be a better artist is super genuine and kind of awesome. I love her kind of pushing back against people that criticized her for dating Maddie Healy. Problem with this album is that Jack Antonoff was asleep the entire time. It's just so bland to me, this monochrome, ambient, staid synth pop that Taylor and Jack have become quite comfortable and familiar with making. And to me, the music just doesn't pop on this album. Like, I didn't hear a hit on here. Musically, it just comes across as quite dull. The moments that actually have like some punch to them, whether it's like Guilty as a Sin or the Florence and the Machine song Florida, or the closer Clara Bow, like they stand out because there's actually like noise and like instrumentation build up to those, and there's actually some personality to those songs, and they really come alive because of course we know what kind of writer Taylor Swift can be. But for the most of this track list, which the main album is 16 songs, 65 minutes, it's pretty samey. And then you get this anthology version, which is double in the length of the song, a bunch of bonus tracks, none of which really add much of anything to this. And I don't know, like, you got to be really invested in some of that songwriting, I think, because the music, I don't think, invites you back. Track 1, the lead single, Fortnite, features Post Malone, and honestly, my biggest takeaway with that song, which I think is solid for what it is. Again, a lot of these songs are kind of dull to me, but when the drums kick in, the chorus is solid. Taylor's singing pretty softly on it, but Post Malone is in by far the coldest stretch of his career. Circles came out in 2019, unless you forget. And yet, in the past month, Post Malone has been on a Taylor Swift album and a Beyonce album. I mean, honestly, like, talk about, putting food on the table, man. Very impressive to me. And I'm not a Post guy, but, like, it's pretty shocking. But yeah, I think that song's okay. I think the second song's a lot stronger, the Tortured Poets Department, where that's where you get, some of these, I think, big quotables, right? We declared Charlie Puth should be a bigger artist. Honestly, I think I deserve a writing credit for that. I've been saying that for years. But in all seriousness, that's like a cool thing here, platformed, right? Charlie Puth, famous pop artist, by no means a superstar. He should be a bigger artist. He's a very talented songwriter. I think a lot of people agree with that. Really cool to hear that from Taylor Swift, and now that's going to be a normie opinion. I think that's awesome. I don't know how I feel about one of the other lines right after that. I scratch your head, you fall asleep like a tattooed golden retriever. Obviously, it's a reference to Travis Kelce being like the golden retriever boyfriend, the meme. Is it a bit corny? Is it a bit too obvious? A line like that? I don't know. I thought Down Bad was solid because there's actually like some sticky melody on that. You don't get a lot of that on this. Like, it's certainly like a stark contrast to Midnight's in that regard. So Long London, I think people saw this one coming when they saw the track list, but R.I.P. Joe Alwyn. That song has a nice slow build to it, pretty cool. But Daddy, I Love Him. I think this is probably my favorite songwriting on this. This is the song about, of course, Matty Healy and the criticism Taylor got for dating him due to his polarizing and controversial nature, due to the things he's said and done in the past. Biggest chorus so far on that track list to that point. But I think just like Taylor Swift actually kind of pushing back, taking ownership. And that's pushing back on her fans, people that criticized her because they like her, and I it's cool to hear, I think, that kind of punchiness from Taylor. You don't quite always get that. Fresh Out the Slammer, I think this is where the songwriting can be maybe a little corny, right? Referring to like being single again and being like, all right, let's get after it kind of thing. It's okay. Florida, featuring Florence and the Machine, really stands out because it's unlike basically the whole track list to that point. It's almost kind of like a soft rock, like power rock type song. Florence is definitely making her presence known. Guilty as Sin, as I said, probably one of my favorite songs on here. Super up tempo. Yeah, and again, like there's like nothing up tempo to this point on it, so it's nice change, and the chorus really picks up on it. I think Clara Bow's a nice closer, but ultimately, like, I just don't think there's a lot of pop on here. Not like pop like the genre music, but like stuff that pops out at you. Because again, I feel like this is really samey sonics, and it's just kind of bland. I think a lot of this writing, a lot of these song structures, because it's coming from Taylor Swift and it's coming from Jack Antonoff, would work a lot better on just a different style of pop music than what this is. Anthology, you do get, I think, a kind of funny diss to Kim Kardashian, the Thank You Amy song. I don't know. Taylor Swift dissing Kim and Kanye by extension in 2024, like, we're still doing this? Like, it would have been more interesting and entertaining if you had that smoke publicly on a song 10 years ago when this happened, or 8 years ago, whenever it was. It feels kind of old hat to me now, but I still respect the fuck you of it all, I suppose. Of course, ultimately, like, reception to this album, popularity for this album doesn't matter at all, because it's Taylor's 11th album, and it doesn't compare, nor could it ever really compare to all her past classic works, or her reinventions that she did, like Folklore, for example. So what is this really here to do? It's just kind of here to keep the house warm, So here's some more stuff, because Taylor has been flooding the zone lately between the Taylor's versions, the Vault re-release tracks, Midnight's, this album getting 15 more bonus tracks. Like, this is just kind of Taylor's MO right now. It's a lot less curated, because she doesn't need to be curated. So I guess in a sense, that's perhaps disappointing because it's not as inspiring artistically. But she's also, of course, too big to fail, and in the midst of her most successful run ever. So, I mean, who does it really matter? I guess, Will this contend for Album of the Year at the Grammys? We'll see. She'll be up against Beyonce. Gotta say, Cowboy Carter's a lot better than this. So that's what I'll be pulling for, especially because Beyonce hasn't won this category yet, unfortunately. So we'll see about that. That'll be a fun thing to talk about in the year to come. But yeah, Taylor Swift's 11th album, The Tortured Poets Department, didn't do it for me. I'm sure it'll do it for a lot of Swifties, though, because that's how it goes. Let me know, what did you like about it? Did you like it more than me? If so, please let me know why. And for more music reviews, subscribe, and I'll see you next time. What's up? Welcome back to Nostalgia. Dave here with a review of Rebel Moon Part 2, The Scargiver, Zack Snyder's latest sci-fi space opera film, out now on Netflix, of course, following up Rebel Moon Part 1, which came out at the end of December last year. Zack Snyder in business with Netflix now, following the exit from Warner Brothers and DC. I liked his last Netflix entry, Army of the Dead, a really good, fun, action zombie film. Rebel Moon Part 1, though, left me very cold, so I was not exactly anticipating Rebel Moon Part 2. And I have to say, Rebel Moon Part 2, The Scargiver, is a marginal, at best, upgrade over Part 1, but really doesn't justify Rebel Moon existing as two movies at all. There was just no story here. This is a series of two films that is so clearly, obviously, a facsimile of past sci-fi and film works. Part 2 has a very overt Seven Samurai reference throughout it. More than anything else, the complete lack of character development, lack of characterization across the Rebel Moon films, combined with incredibly shallow world building and honestly disappointing visuals from Zack Snyder, who has gotten a lot of earned credit in the past for being a visual stylist. There's just not a lot here. I think some of the action, some of the set piece has cool moments, but ultimately Rebel Moon is just not fully baked as an idea to exist beyond its obvious reference points. I feel bad for Sofia Boutella, who I think is a very credible action star, but the material is just not there for her to really have much to work with. And ultimately, Rebel Moon Part 2, it's a bit of a slog. I think it's visually a bit better looking, perhaps because this film doesn't planet hop as much as the first film did, so there's not quite as much like heavy CGI backdrops. But yeah, there's just not enough here. I thought was pretty amusing was in Part 2, of course, before the final battle happens when the villagers get attacked by the Imperium. We have Sofia Boutella's Cora and all of her gang that she got together in Part 1. They're all gathered around the table strategizing, and it's just this incredibly clunky expository scene where they literally all take turns telling each other their backstory and their dark paths, and thus their motivations for joining up with Cora and her cause. And it just kind of shows how shallow the world building and character development has been across two Rebel Moon movies. And why not just make this one movie? And I just don't understand what could possibly be in the extended R-rated Snyder cuts of Rebel Moon. Like, what more did you have to tell us? Because you told us so little across the 4 hours that we did get. What could possibly be in there? It's just lackluster. I thought the mythical robotic knight droid character that is voiced by Anthony Hopkins, once that character inevitably shows up to join the fight and choose violence once again, it's pretty fun, cool visuals, enjoyable for what it is. I thought Duna Bay's character has a fun death scene, with the laser swords, although that's really the biggest scene she got across the two movies. She's just not developed as a character enough for that death to really land, and no one else really dies on the good guy's side. So, I was just kind of expecting a bit more. I think the laser swords, for what they are, of course, obvious lightsaber references, for what they are, looks pretty cool. The swishing of the colors across the screen, especially with Snyder's trademark slow motion, solid visual conception, looks pretty cool. Ultimately, I just think Zack Snyder's a bit high on his own supply with Rebel Moon. He's the director, he's a producer, he's a co-writer, and he's the story creator, the genesis of the whole thing. It's just a bit too much, and I think someone who's been a visual stylist, the CGI is a bit flat throughout Rebel Moon, and that's not something we should be saying about Zack Snyder, who's got a lot of, visual chops in the past. So I think Netflix should stay in business with him. Army of the Dead, I liked it quite a bit. But don't make more Rebel Moons. I know Snyder is open to it, but don't do this. There's just the diminishing returns are so obvious with making more Rebel Moon. Do something else. I think he's still, despite his faults with character and story more often than not, visually and, action-wise, there's a lot of talent there. And we just gotta steer Snyder sometimes, it feels like. But yeah, Rebel Moon Part 2, much like Part 1, it's just a big old miss, honestly. And it is what it is. But let me know, how did you like it? Did you like it more than me? If so, please let me know why. And for more movie reviews, subscribe. And I'll see you next time. What's up? Welcome back to Nostalgia. Dave here with a review of The Ministry of Ungentlemanly Warfare, the new spy action comedy film from Guy Ritchie, starring Henry Cavill, Alan Ritchson, and Isaac Gonzalez. And this is Guy Ritchie's 5th film since 2020. And to me, actually, I think it's the best one of the bunch. Guy Ritchie, he's just been incredibly prolific. To me, it's quite amusing that Guy Ritchie, immediately after taking the Disney bag to make Aladdin in 2019, was like, you know what? Fuck that. I'm going to do my thing and make all these mid-budget action movies. And it's been pretty solid results. Ultimately, we haven't gotten a, action like cult classic the way like Snatch or Lock, Stock, were received when those movies came out. But I think by and large, this run of The Gentleman, Wrath of Man, Operation Fortune, The Covenant, and now The Ministry of Ungentlemanly Warfare, it's been a pretty solid run. And Guy Ritchie is continuing to be very prolific. He already has another movie finished coming out in January called In the Gray, and he's currently filming another movie right now called Fountain of Youth. So this will continue, and I think it's pretty fun. And The Ministry of Ungentlemanly Warfare, this is a $60 million action film, and I think despite its limitations, with like a modest budget more or less, it's still pretty credible and fun for what it is. The Ministry of Ungentlemanly Warfare, Guy Ritchie's latest action comedy film, it's a really fun time. I have to say, I enjoyed the movie quite a bit. It's really lacking in character development, really any kind of characterization, but despite all that, it's kind of just fun to watch Winston Churchill's, secret goon team, a group we didn't even know about until this was declassified in 2016, to watch these goons very fictionally execute Operation Postmaster and try and take down the Nazi U-boat program during World War II. Henry Cavill never got to play James Bond. What did he do instead? He decided to play the real-life inspiration for James Bond. And to put a finer note on that, Ian Fleming, of course, the creator of James Bond, is actually in this movie. It's a fun time. I think Isaac Gonzalez is quite enjoyable as well as a spy femme fatale. Alan Ritchson of Amazon's Reacher fame, really convincing as a murderous Swedish archer. Henry Golding, charming as well. Alex Pettyfer's here. It's pretty fun. I actually quite enjoyed Isaac Gonzalez's screen partner for much of the movie, which would be Babs Oluzmakun as Mr. Heron, who's kind of like a fixer, undercover agent type character. And that's an actor who should be familiar to many because he played Jamis in Dune Part 1 particularly. He's great in the film, and Isa is great as well. I think we've been kind of waiting and hoping for Isaac Gonzalez to really kind of pop and find, a lane in Hollywood post kind of the Baby Driver breakout of many years ago at this point. And this felt like a good use of her talent as like this singer, actor, spy character. She was really fun in this movie, very convincing. Her scenes with Babs, her scenes with the villain of the movie, like the Nazi commandant, those are all quite good, quite crackling. And I think Isa probably agrees about this because she's going to be in the next 2 Guy Ritchie movies, the one coming out in January and the one currently filming. So that's pretty fun. Because it's a modest, action comedy film, there's only so many set pieces, right? There's really 2. You have kind of the end of Act 1 where the crew has to go save or rescue the already captured Joffrey Appleyard character played by Alex Pettyfer. And that involves the goons going after and taking down this Nazi, prison camp on an island in like broad daylight. And it's just mayhem. Like, I think the humor angle to this movie is pretty consistent, where like Cavill's characters like don't forget to have fun, and they really don't. We're just watching like brazen ultra violence throughout this movie as they just slaughter Nazis at abandon, with reckless abandon. The body count is incredibly high, and I think that scene's a lot of fun. Once we get, though, to like the main location of the movie, which is the West African island Fernando Po. At this time, it's a Spanish colony, so it's technically neutral territory during, the days of World War II before the American involvement. And there it's pretty funny. You have like Spanish characters, of course, all the Nazis everywhere. We have our undercover spies, and then we have like the main goon crew, Churchill's goons, showing up. They're on their way. So in a sense, it's you have multiple threads going on at once in the movie, and I think the final set piece as they achieve their mission, it's fun. The stealing of the boat once they realize they can't blow it up, it's fun. The problem is it's very dark. It's happening at night, strategically speaking. But the movie's a tad underlit. I have to say it's kind of hard to follow some of the action once things really start to pop off. But I still thought it was pretty enjoyable. And I think this stuff, back in England, back at home, with Carrie Elways as M and Freddie Fox as Ian Fleming and Rory Kinnear as Churchill. It's very thin, it's very basic, it's very surface level, but honestly everything is kind of thin in the movie. You're really only watching this for the humorous action and the brazen killing. There's really nothing else to really latch onto with it. Nothing to really surprise you about the plotting. At the end, you get Churchill saying the title of the film, basically the "I'm putting a team together" film, as he realizes he has this team. And of course, all these characters in real life were sent on various other missions, and of course it's a very fictionalized portrayal of this real life war event, but it's almost set up for an amusing chance for a sequel. I don't see that happening by any stretch, given this movie is opening to mid-single digits millions wise in the US, so we can put that away, but amusing enough. And yeah, I think it's the best of the Guy Ritchie run of 5, the post-COVID Guy Ritchie films. I think it's definitely the most just broadly entertaining of the bunch. Perhaps you might defer to some of the humor in The Gentleman. It's a bit more unique. It's a bit more layered. But I think the action in this film is pretty consistent, and the script is incredibly basic. But this is just kind of a solid, down the middle Lionsgate action film, and he has some decent star power. I think again, Isaac Gonzalez and Henry Cavill pop quite well. So, for what this movie is, and really I think you just have to treat it for what it is, a movie like this, I think it's successful. But let me know, what you think about the Ministry of Ungentlemanly Warfare? How would you rank it compared to all the other recent Guy Ritchie films? And for more movie reviews, subscribe, and I'll see you next time. What's up? Welcome back to Nostalgia. Dave here with a review of Shogun, the historical drama miniseries out now in full on FX and Hulu. Shogun has got a lot of plaudits to this point, also surprising rating hits for FX, getting over 9 million viewers for its premiere in its first week. Very justly earned as well, because Shogun has really got critical acclaim, commercial acclaim across the board. It's really been the show of 2024 thus far. We're going to talk about the entire run of the series, all 10 episodes. Going to go through each episode, my general thoughts. I have a lot to say. I really love the show, and I think this is something to celebrate. FX's Shogun is a television masterpiece, easily the best show of 2024 thus far, but also I'm confident in saying will go down as one of the best shows of the 2020s. It's really one of the most gripping TV series I've ever watched, and it accomplishes that by just absolutely impeccable character development. And I'm not just talking about the main characters on the show. Of course, Hiroyuki Sanada's Toranaga, you know what you're going to get from Sanada. Tadanobu Asano as Yabushige, very charismatic, great stuff there. Cosmo Jarvis kind of comes out of nowhere as the Anjin, John Blackthorne, he's great. But the true highlight, of course, is Anna Sawai as Lady Mariko. This was a absolute knockout of her performance. What makes Shogun so great is it's not just those lead characters that are so good. Think of characters like Buntaro, or Toranaga's son, or Lady Fuji. It really rewards your investment because we continue to learn more and more about these characters. It's so rich, so intricately drawn. And on top of that, amazing historical accuracy and period detail. It's really everything you want in a TV show. I mean, there's really nothing bad to say about it. Coming into this show, Shogun, the advanced press got a lot of plaudits for being compared to Game of Thrones in a loving way, where the palace intrigue, the plotting, and the strength of the screenwriting, all of that together really was getting people's attention. I think that's all accurate, but what's interesting about Shogun is just how satisfying the show feels, despite not being littered with big blockbuster, Game of Thrones season 6 style set pieces. It doesn't have that. Even in this finale, of course, spoilers for all of Shogun, don't know why you're watching if you didn't know that coming in. But with the finale, right, we don't get like that big final battle. We don't get Toranaga versus Ishido. It's alluded to via Toranaga's words to Yabushige, but it's a character show. And by giving you such a subdued finale, I was really kind of knocked out by it. And I think, Justin Marks, Rachel Kondo, staff writer Emily Yoshida, this whole creative team, they spent a lot of time on Shogun. This was in post-production for a long time. They even had to jumpstart production to maintain the option rights to this show. It took a long time to bring this version of Shogun to the screen. Of course, it was a miniseries in the 80s based off the James Clavell novel. We know that. But the time invested in telling this story clearly shows, because there was such an intricate planning with how they wanted to, create this narrative. And there's just payoff after payoff with characters, even if it's not flashy action, flashy plot progression that is, achieving that payoff. And I mean, it's a standout series to me. And I think it's probably going to run away with the Emmy for limited series. That much is very obvious, especially with FX behind it. But I would certainly be pulling for Anna Sawai to win supporting actress in a limited series. Frankly, Shogun's strong enough to compete against all the drama shows in the big drama category, but I think because it's a clear limited series, it can kind of take those easy dubs and just, run away and run it up with the limited series categories. But yeah, I mean, I was just really knocked out by this show. I think week to week, and talk about a show that benefits from the week to week drop. My God, it's so thankful that it wasn't a binge drop, because just to sit in this world, of course, turn of 1600, feudal Japan, just to spend time with these characters and go on this journey. I think the time spent really shows, and you get rewarded for all the time investment and planning the creative team put into it. So let's just kind of jump into the series itself, because I think there's just so many awesome moments. But again, let's back up to the cast. Hiroyuki Sanada as Toranaga, he's great the whole time. He's very regal, very serene. I think one thing that's really key about Shogun's storytelling, and maybe it's something you could butt up against a little bit, is that us as the viewer have to kind of just buy into Toranaga kind of being an all-seeing or all-knowing mastermind type character. That's how he's portrayed to us. That's how he's kind of portrayed to the characters around him, where we don't really know what he's thinking or what he's up to. But I think the show, rewards you for having that faith and how it goes. I think the finale as well, in Toranaga's final words to Yabushige, where Yabushige asks him says to him if he wanted to be Shogun all along, was that his plan? And we don't even know at the end. We don't really know where that's going to settle. And yet, I never really felt like he was this magical character or anything. I thought everything he achieved was done very well. And Sanada, obviously, a paragon of Japanese filmmaking, as people know, really great throughout the show. And Tadanobu Osano, who I had been quite familiar with as well, because he has done a lot of Hollywood stuff like Sanada, man, he deserves a lot of credit for how he portrayed Yabushige. Yabushige is told to us as the viewer as a snake very early on. We know he's an untrustworthy, flip-flopping scumbag, right? We watch him boil alive one of Blackthorn's mates, in the first episode, for crying out loud, right? We know he's a weirdo, and he, is not loyal. And yet, because Asano has so much just raw charisma playing this character who feels between a rock and a hard place at times and is trying to do what's best for himself, but in the process has no spine at all, I think he deserves a lot of credit, because right up until the end, right up until the penultimate episode, where he finally does something truly unforgivable, you're kind of rocking with the dude still. And I think Asano deserves a lot of credit for that. Cosmo Jarvis as John Blackthorne, the Anjin. Man, I think it takes a lot to be this successful, white character in a show set in Japan. We've literally just talked about this with Tokyo Vice on Max, when you had Ansel Elgort and Rachel Keller playing white expats in 1990s Japan. It's very similar here. A lot's asked of you, and I think Jarvis, much like Elgort and Keller, learned to speak Japanese for this show. Convincing. Not an easy thing to do, obviously, but also I think Jarvis's just voice, his demeanor, his the drawl to how he speaks, as the Anjin, man, it's quite memorable to me. Like it's a he's not like the star of the show in the traditional sense because he's a character who's very much along for the ride. He's not a conventionally heroic person. He's the Anjin. He is the pilot. He is the ship seaman, right? He's not this cunning warrior. He doesn't become amazing swinging a katana sword by the end of Shogun. This is not The Last Samurai, right? That's not who he is. So I think Jarvis has to do a lot as Blackthorn, especially in the back half of Shogun, where the Blackthorn character is feeling kind of largely out of place and, again, frustratingly powerless as he doesn't really know what he can do. And I thought Jarvis really throughout the show, but especially in the back half when I think a lot more was asked of him, really delivered. And then, of course, as I said before, Anna Sawai, just the absolute coming out party for Shogun. I mean, I was a fan of her in Pachinko. That was a supporting role. Not much was asked of her in Monarch Legacy of Monsters, but I enjoyed her. Of course, she kind of came out of nowhere to many of us in Fast and Furious 9, lest we forget. But this show, I mean, my God, again, it speaks to, I think, how the narrative is planned with Shogun, because the Lady Mariko character has so much power and narrative importance while still being in a story where women are largely at the behest of men, in the society we're watching. And I think Anna Sawai, her acting talent is so evident in Shogun, just what she can communicate with her face, what she can communicate with her silence, with her glances, her mannerisms, her lack of reaction at times. You kind of saw the whole gamut across the season, and I thought really knocks you out. Obviously, also the chemistry between the Anjin and Lady Mariko when they get close to each other romantically, very convincing, I must say. I thought the chemistry was certainly there. But really, more than anything else, Sawai is able to communicate Lady Mariko's really deep pain, deep dread as a character, as we learn more about her and her genuine, consistent unhappiness with her life. Once we learn what happened to her father, learn the realities of her marriage to Buntaro and her real genuine belief in being kind of in a life of service to Toranaga, because that's the only thing that really gives her any kind of fulfillment. And when you're in the penultimate episode and you realize Lady Mariko will commit seppuku after being refused exit from Osaka Castle by Ishido, you believe it because you know how much that really means to her. And I think there's some great scenes with her in the church sprinkled throughout earlier parts of the season. And then, of course, when she sacrifices herself intentionally, she didn't necessarily have to do that, but when she puts herself in front of the about to explode bomb, the explosives in front of the locked door at the end of the penultimate episode, you know why. You understand. Again, I think it's all Anna Sawai. She just really, really knocked it out of the park. Just an amazing performance, completely screen stealing the entire time she's on the screen. And as I said before, some of the supporting characters, I think they get their moments, they get their stuff's colored in for them, fulfilled. There is character development across the cast list. Someone like Buntaro, right? Mariko's husband, who she does not love, right? Who is literally abusing her in the context of their marriage. You learn more about him and what he cares about, and not that necessarily you like him, but more is colored in. Right, I would say the same for Toranaga's son, Nakakato, who obviously meets a poor end throughout this later in the series. But you clearly understand what kind of character he is and what Toranaga thinks of his eldest son. Yabushige's nephew, his adoptive son, someone who is a very small character early on and really just kind of buddies with Toranaga's son. He becomes quite interesting as he kind of gets his own identity throughout the show and starts to move apart from how Yabushige has been moving, even though he's kind of been in service to him, right? All the consorts, I thought, were surprisingly quite deep as far as characters go. The stuff with the church, I think the lead, the main father who we see, who's, buddies with Mariko, small role still, but starting to learn more about that. It's a show that religion is so central to how the show is told. Of course, you have the kind of insurgency of Christianity in Japan at the time. Some of the regents are Christians, others are not. And yet it's not a show that paints with like a broad, like anti-religious brush by any means. I actually think it's like kind of quite layered in how it goes about telling those things, and the Anjin's adoption of some sort of faith towards the end of the series, I thought was quite well earned as well. I think Lady Ochiba, when she doesn't really come into the show really until like episode 5 or so, when she makes like the power play for the council, but that's a character that starts off kind of vague, but even then gets a little bit more by the end, gets a little bit more detail. Not so much character development, but just like the late breaking introduction of Toranaga's half brother who becomes the regent, Seiki. I mean, he had like the look, right? The white armor, the hairstyle, the way it was, had a villainous look, you could say, perhaps, once, things happen the way they happen. But I thought that was a really memorable character introduction for like the late half of the season. Also, Toranaga's, closest confidant, Hiromatsu. Man, another great character, I thought, who, again, clearly supporting character, clearly in service of Toranaga, doesn't have a whole lot to necessarily do, but like there are certain moments throughout the show. And then when you have in the penultimate episode, or like episode 8, when he commits seppuku, publicly disagreeing with Toranaga, and like it's the most gutting thing, and you really believe it. And then once you learn about Toranaga's plan, like it's like kind of one of those like, oh shit moments when you're watching the show. But again, Hiromatsu as a character, I think you actually kind of grew attached to him as far as the supporting character goes, and like the actor who played him, the older guy, really memorable face, right? Also, I can't forget Lady Fuji, of course, someone who early on, we're introduced to her because her husband commits seppuku on himself and their young child. And you're like, okay, she's clearly like a mourning, now familyless person. What's up with her? But as she gets, pushed into service of the Anjin at Toranaga's behest, we learn more about her, like in concert. I think some of it's very funny early on when there's like the lost in translation stuff with the Anjin and, the rotting pheasant out in the house and stuff like that. Then the very, like, I think tragic, like, miscommunication stuff that leads to the gardener getting killed. Fuji starts to really make her presence felt as a character, and like how she is interacting with Mariko and Buntaro once Buntaro comes back from the dead, seemingly, after you thought he was dead in the very beginning of the series. And then the very end, like talk about like a finale, like subverting expectations to amazing effect. The Anjin taking Fuji out, out to sea to bury her dead family's ashes, spread them, and then Anjin takes the opportunity to let go of the rosary that Mariko, had when she passed. Amazing moment, right? And it's like a great full circle moment for Fuji, again, ancillary character on the show, but also really fitting for wrapping up where the Anjin story has gone. And yeah, man, like this show just up and down knocked me out. Just kind of going through some of my notes here in the episode. I took notes on every episode. There's so much to talk about. Episode 3, I love that like forest ambush out in the woods in Osaka. We would learn throughout the show that actually a lot of people get ambushed in the woods outside Osaka. Pretty funny, honestly. You think Buntaro makes a sacrifice, but he actually comes back. Pretty epic. It would have been cool to watch him fuck up all those samurai. Episode 4, that's where Mariko and the Anjin have that like convo in the bath leading to the sex. And again, I thought it was incredibly earned the way it gets there. But then you have Nakado firing the cannons on Jozen, which was like a crazy like visual moment, right? Seeing Jozen's, mangled body and then saying the war. And big one for sure. Episode 5. I mean, just there's this banger scene throughout this show. Episode 5, Buntaro moves in with Mariko, Fuji, and Blackthorn, and you have the dinner scene where they just keep throwing back the sake, then the arrows going right by Mariko's face, and like of course leading to the violence, and that's where we get the gardener death scene, which I thought was incredibly fucking sad, right? And like to think a really great way to communicate where the characters were at in terms of the difference between customs and the meaning of what life means, right? In terms of you learn that the gardener volunteered for that duty because he got sick recently, and it's just I think the way Shogun is able to ingratiate Blackthorn into the customs of Japan at the time, where he comes to understand why the people he's meeting think about life and duty differently than, his European sensibility has led him to believe. And again, something that builds throughout the series, but you come to understand why he's really kind of ingratiated himself into the culture and kind of come accepting of it. We get this scene in the very beginning of the finale where we see the Anjin on his, I don't know, deathbed, but he's old, on bed, and his grandchildren are there looking at his swords and his armor. So we know he escapes the Japans, as he would put it, right? And I'd love to know how, but he's, kind of holding a rosary, seemingly really adopted the faith. And it's just interesting, I'm curious how people would think about that scene, because it almost feels a tad out of place, almost like Saving Private Ryan, where Private Ryan's old ass like goes up to the, the gravestone and, says that he earned it and all that stuff. Like, it maybe feels a tad out of place, it's because it's also so brief in the finale. Nonetheless, stood out. Episode 6, I love like the 22-year-old flashback to young Mariko as the ward. We kind of learn about her father and his plan, marrying her off to someone kind of insignificant family-wise in Buntara, learning what that means. We learn about what the Crimson Sky plan is, of course, learning about Lady Kiku's relationship with Yabushige's nephew, and, in general, learning about the Willow World brothel and how it's more than that. It's really more of a tea house. I thought all that was actually pretty cool. Episode 7 opening up with Toranaga's first battle as a young, like, boy warlord, basically, helping his opponent commit seppuku. The introduction of Toranaga's half-brother before he realized he's bad, really memorable as well. The end of episode 7, where we hit the failed, ambush, the failed assassination of Toranaga's brother, leading to the death of Toranaga's son. Man, that was a show or an episode where I was like, once I realized what was happening, it's kind of like one of those like pumps you up. It's like, yo, kill him, like get it done. And then watching Nakado like meet his untimely demise by literally slipping on a pond rock and breaking his neck. Like, it's like, yeah, what else would have happened to that guy? Honestly, it felt earned, but it was a hyped moment. And then again, the standout, of course, that's episode 7. Episode 8, you had the funeral. Tornado can't go. We're starting to learn or be suspicious of the plan. Hiramatsu dies. He visits the funeral pyre at the very end. Then episode 9, really just those 4 scenes, right? You have publicly Mariko defy the council, say she's going to leave. Amazing scene. Amazing from Sawai. Then the scene where she attempts to leave with her men, and she gets refused by Shido's men. All of her men get killed. She tries to fight her way out. She can't. Realizes she can't escape. Publicly says that she will commit seppuku at sunset because of this grievous act of defiance, which is permitting her from serving her lord. And then we go to the scene where she's going to commit seppuku, and the regent, who she asks to be a second as a Christian, does not come. So Blackthorn volunteers to be the second, finish it off. And you really think it's going to happen, because we know how much Mariko cares about wanting to die in a certain way, right? And what it means to her. That's been very well established at that point. So you believe it's going to happen, and it's sad, right? Is again the best character on the show. You're fucking invested, and then it doesn't happen. And Shido shows up last second, and I was like, wow, good fake out. But then I clicked up, and I was like, oh shit. 10 minutes left in the episode. I didn't feel good. And then, of course, Yabushige has the Judas moment, and leading, of course, to Mariko's death. And it's just a standout episode. I think it's a stone cold, instant classic type episode. Speaking of Thrones, always the penultimate episode being very eventful. Certainly the case here with Shogun as well. But yeah, I feel like I've just kind of been super long-winded with this, but absolutely amazing show. I'm very curious how hard FX would push the creative team for a second season, given the rating success of it. I'm not going to expect more Shogun. I don't think it makes sense. Of course, this show ends where the adapted book ends. Also, they put so much time and planning into the development of Shogun Season 1. There is none of that started for a Season 2. It would be many years before they get Season 2 done. And, so many characters off the board. I feel like it'd be a bit of diminishing returns. I feel like the leave you wanting more is a great place for the show to end, right? A little bit of ambiguity about Toranaga. Obviously, the Anjin's fate in general. How does he get back to England? Like, we'll never know, right? But, on the other hand, it's tempting to think about what would happen, because this is obviously fictional characters, but it's right at the turn of the Tokugawa shogunate. It's a very eventful time in Japanese history, so there's certainly richness to explore, especially a show like this, which is so concerned with being historically accurate, right? Similar to how Tokyo Vice Season 2 ends in, I think, a really satisfying way from a character standpoint, but as you're approaching the 2000s and Japan is entering economic downturn time, like there's meat in the bone for story, right? You just have to come up with it. That being said, I'm not banking on more Shogun, and I think as a one and done, it's like up there with the best of them. Honestly, my number one show 2024. Apologies to Mr. and Mrs. Smith, which I also loved, but I'll be hard pressed to see anything top Shogun. Like, I'm very excited for House of the Dragon. I'm very excited for The Bear Season 3, but to me, Shogun was near flawless, so I'm expecting it to probably be my best show of the year. We'll see what happens. It's only April. But yeah, let me know. What did you think about Shogun? Obviously, I had a lot of thoughts. How did you feel about it? What was your favorite moment about it? Favorite performance on the show? Let me know. Do you want to see a season 2? And for more TV reviews, subscribe, and I'll see you next time. All right, that's going to do it for the pod this week. Next week, we have something very exciting. Luca Guadagnino's new dramatic, romantic, sex, sports film, Challengers, starring Zendaya, Josh O'Connor, and Mike Faced. I've already seen it. It's amazing. Can't wait to get into that. Also, new album from Justice, their first album in like 6 years. Very exciting. On the K-pop side, new album from IVE. And also going to do XXL Freshman 2024. The time of the year has come once again to talk about the rising stars in hip-hop. And we'll do just that. Make sure you subscribe. YouTube.com/nostalgiapod. Linktree.com/nostalgiapod. See links below. Get the best of 2024 Spotify playlist also linked below. Leave a review. Let me know what's good. Leave a comment. And I'll see you next week.